Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Yes, we're in a participatory mode, a celebratory mode this week at Harvard as we head towards commencement. So welcome to the Harvard Art Museums. I'm Martha Tedeschi. I'm the Elizabeth and John Moore's Cabot Director of the Harvard Art Museums for about another month, after which I retire. So this is especially poignant for me to see such a wonderful crowd gathered for our latest exhibition. As is our practice, we begin with a land acknowledgement. Harvard University is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. Today, we are celebrating the museum's newest exhibition, Imagine Me and You. Talitha, our curator here, did you take this title from the Beatles? From what? Oh, okay. All right, you're going to tell us more about that. Anyway, Imagine Me and You. Everybody's already got the song playing in their heads. Dutch and Flemish Encounters with the Islamic World, 1450 to 1750, curated by Talitha Schepers, who is our Stanley H. Durwood Foundation Fellow from 2022 to 2024. She's been a wonderful member of our curatorial team, and we are very proud to be presenting her exhibition on the third floor galleries through August 18th. Imagine Me and You tells the little-known story of the diverse encounters that shaped how artists from the Low Countries, which was part of the Habsburg Empire, how the Low Countries engaged with the Islamic world over the course of 300 years. The exhibition challenges the persistent notion that war, in particular religious war between Christians and Muslims, dominated such interactions. Let's think about that for a minute. Did we all think that that was the case? Talitha is going to set us straight. In reality, the Habsburg, Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal empires were all multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilingual, and multifaith societies. Prompted by the rich diversity of these empires, Imagine Me and You explores a myriad of cultural, diplomatic, and mercantile interactions that took place either in person or through the exchange of objects, art, and ideas. By bringing together works from different Harvard Art Museum collections and local institutions, the exhibition provides a new way of understanding the museum's permanent holdings within this more global context. This exhibition was made possible by support from the Stanley H. Durwood Foundation Support Fund and the Melvin R. Seaton and Janine Luke Fund for Publications and Exhibitions. Related programming is supported by the M. Victor Liventrit Lecture Series Endowment Fund. Special thanks are due to our own Aishan Yoltar Yildirim, who is our Norma Jean Calderwood Curator of Islamic and later Indian art, who's with us tonight, for her advisory role, and to Joachim Hohmann, Maida and George Abrams Curator of Drawings, who's also with us tonight. And So-Young Lee, our Chief Curator, the Landon and Lavinia Clay Chief Curator, for her support and guidance of this project. Research contributions were made by Celia S. Chari, who is our Beale Family Postgraduate Fellow in Conservation Science, Alexandra Chipkin, who is our Richard I. Shader Fellow in Paintings Conservation, and Adrian Gendron, Objects Conservation Fellows. This was, in fact, a really wonderful collaboration between our fellows, curatorial and conservation. One of the special things about the Harvard Art Museum is that we have both under one roof, conservation and curatorial, and that we have so many fellows who find each other and help each other advance their projects. So very proud that that's what you will see on the walls upstairs on the 3rd floor. Additional research perspectives were provided by PhD candidates in Harvard's Department of History of Art and Architecture, former graduate interns in the Division of European and American Art, and graduate student teachers at the Harvard Art Museums. And I will name those Kushi Chudari, Casper Koleda, and Rebecca Selch, and Shireen Shah. So loans were generously provided by the Maida and George Abrams collection and the Julie and David Tobey collection in New York, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and the following Harvard University collections: the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, the Houghton Library, and the Fine Arts Library. It's now my great pleasure to welcome the exhibition's curator, Talitha Schepers, to the podium, and she will take us from here. Talitha Schepers is the current, as I mentioned, Stanley H. Durwood Foundation Curatorial Fellows in Drawings at the Harvard Art Museums. She completed her PhD degree at the Courtauld Institute of Art with a dissertation on works on paper created by Netherlandish artists who traveled in a Habsburg diplomatic context to the Ottoman Empire. While completing her doctoral research, Talitha acted as co-editor-in-chief of the peer-reviewed journal Immediations, undertook a work placement at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and a graduate internship in drawings at the J. Paul Getty Museum. So you can imagine how lucky we felt when we were able to bring her into the fold here at the Harvard Art Museums. Talitha has also completed a CRESS postdoctoral fellowship on the Dutch textile trade project, and so she was the perfect person to help us mount this exhibition, which is completely her brainchild. So imagine me and you, Dutch and Flemish Encounters with the Islamic World, is Talitha's first exhibition, although she's been thinking about it and generating it for a very long time with a lot of different collaborators and advisors, and the Harvard Art Museums are very proud to present it. Talitha.
Hey, hi everyone. Can everybody hear me? I have a very loud and booming voice. I'm scared that I will make you deaf by the end of this presentation. So, dear Marta, thank you very much for that kind introduction. And I'm actually thrilled that today's celebratory lecture coincides with World Day for Cultural Diversity for Dialogue and Development. And that's a total coincidence. UNESCO states that this day celebrates not only the richness of the world's cultures, but also the essential role of intercultural dialogue for achieving peace and sustainable development. And so within that spirit, and without further ado, it is now my absolute pleasure to kick off this afternoon of conversation. So today's program consists of 4 short lectures, followed by a conversation with the speakers and you, our audience. And as curator of the exhibition, Imagine Me and You, I will first give a brief overview of the exhibition, its core themes, and some of its highlights. I will then give the floor to our 3 guest speakers, Ayşen Yoltar Yildirim, Stephanie Schrader, and Yael Rice, each of whom will give a brief 15-minute talk, and that will delve deeper into some of the objects on view upstairs. And by bringing together these distinct academic and curatorial voices, I wanted this lecture to reflect the multicultural representation visible throughout the exhibition. So my own scholarship has been profoundly inspired by the academic and curatorial research of all 3 guest speakers. And as such, I cannot wait to hear their presentations, and I look forward to our conversation afterwards. And then just a bit of housekeeping. I will briefly introduce each speaker before their talk, and we warmly welcome any questions in the conservation part of the event. And then last but not least, before I delve into my presentation, I want to acknowledge that this exhibition would not have come alive without the support of numerous colleagues, both in and outside of the Harvard Art Museums. And I'm profoundly grateful to each and every one of you. It would take me the whole lecture just to name everyone, so thank you. But specifically, I want to thank Aishan for her extensive advisory role throughout this project and for guiding me on the display of Ottoman textiles and carpets. And further thanks are also due to Joachim Hohmann for his support and to Casey Monahan, who navigated me through the entire exhibition process. So, I'm going to briefly repeat what Marta said. But Imagine Me and You, Dutch and Flemish Encounters with the Islamic World tells the little-known story of diverse encounters that shaped how artists from the Low Countries, part of the Habsburg Empire, engaged with the Islamic world over the course of 300 years. The exhibition challenges a persistent notion that war, in particular religious war between Christians and Muslims, dominated such interactions. So in reality, as Marta mentioned, the Habsburg, the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal Empire, they were all multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual, and multi-faith societies. And I really want to hone down that point. And so prompted by these rich diversities of these empires, the exhibition explores a myriad of cultural, diplomatic, and mercantile interaction that took place either in person or through the exchange of objects, art, and ideas. And so Imagine Me and You seeks to bring to the fore a more complex and a more nuanced reality of cross-cultural exchange and provides a unique opportunity to showcase the museum's ongoing academic, curatorial, and conservation research, while also engaging with diverse audiences. So the exhibition explores how Netherlandish representations of the Islamic world were meant to be understood at the time. Artists from the Low Countries increasingly refined their techniques to create ever more lifelike depictions, but lifelikeness should not be mistaken for reality. The majority of works in the exhibition are not accurate representations of events, but imagined renderings created by highly skilled artists, many of whom never visited the Ottoman, Safavid, or Mughal empires. Still, through trade and diplomacy, tangible commodities from the Islamic world, from tulips to textiles, did make their way into the Low Countries and its artistic output. The key theme of the exhibition is encounter, and you will see this word emphasized throughout all related programming. And fun note, in my PhD dissertation, that was the main correction I had, to stop using the word encounter. So, ironically, this is my next project. So my main hope for this show is that visitors will explore the exhibition either in person or through the accompanying digital resource, and that they will encounter something new and meaningful about the cultures represented, or something that inspires them to see their own culture through fresh eyes. So the exhibition features 121 objects, including 42 loans. We have 4 books from Houghton Library, and I'm just showing 3 here. The map at the bottom is about 1 meter long, so definitely go and find that one. We have 27 prints from the Bini collection at the Fine Arts Library here at the Harvard University. We have 2 medals and 6 prints from the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and this print here is also very large, so definitely go and find that one as well. I love large prints. We have 1 pair of Ottoman platform shoes called Nalens from the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology. We have 1 tulip drawing from the Maida and George Abrams collection, and we have 1 horse drawing from the Toby collection. And so by bringing together these different objects from the Harvard Art Museum's collection, local lenders, this exhibition provides a new way for understanding our collection, as Marta mentioned. So a key goal of building the object list for this exhibition was to provide audiences in Cambridge and the Boston area with the opportunity to engage with original research through objects belonging to and accessible at the Harvard Art Museums and local institutions. And I'm hopeful that the exhibition provides a first step in future research that future and further research into the richness of these collections. So the exhibition consists of 11 sections that guide the visitor thematically and chronologically through this narrative of cross-cultural encounters. Now, as this is only a 15-minute long presentation, I unfortunately cannot explore each section in detail. I do, however, want to highlight 3 specific sections that speak to the larger ambitions of this exhibition project. So upon entering the first gallery, your eyes will be immediately drawn to the back wall of the gallery, which is our so-called tulip wall. At the center, this picture does not do it justice, by the way. Go upstairs, it looks way better in real life. At the center of this dynamic display is a tulip by Margaretha de Heer, the only female artist on view in the show, which was lent to us by George Abrams. In this exhibition section titled Tulips, Tulipomania, I wanted to contextualize Dutch tulip drawings by placing them in dialogue with Ottoman objects. Tulips, along with other flowers, such as carnations and hyacinths, were omnipresent in Ottoman surroundings, featuring in textiles, ceramics, and architecture. During his residency at the Habsburg Embassy in Istanbul, Netherlandish ambassador and keen gardener Ohirgeslaer de Boesbeek arranged for non-European bulbs, like tulips, to be sent to the gardens of Vienna. Boesbeek and his diplomatic retinue are often credited as being the first to import tulips from the Ottoman Empire into the Low Countries. However, there is evidence to suggest that the tulip bulbs had already started to circulate in Europe via other trade routes. Now, in the northern Netherlands, broken tulips in particular became fashionable. Their multicolored, flamed, or striped petals are caused by a plant virus. By combining infected bulbs with healthy ones, the Dutch cultivated new varieties, and only a handful of which are still in existence today. As tulips bloom only a short time, drawings such as these enabled owners to enjoy them much longer. They were prized both for their beauty and for being records of different varieties. In the Dutch Republic, tulips became a highly sought-after luxury commodity, resulting in a speculative frenzy starting in 1634, nowadays known as tulipomania. Bulbs fetched exorbitant prices and were traded as currency until the market crashed in 1637. When the speculative bubble burst, some were left with contracts to purchase tulips at prices 10 times greater than those on the open market, while others now possessed bulbs worth a fraction of what they paid. An additional graph in the exhibition provides more context and debunks some of the myths surrounding tulipomania. Although tulips were omnipresent in the Ottoman Empire, both the actual flowers and their visual representations, they reached a new level of popularity under the reign of Sultan Ahmed III, when the Ottomans experienced their own tulip craze during the tulip era in the 1720s. So now considered a national symbol of the Netherlands, tulips are a prime example of an intertwined past and the effects of cross-cultural encounters. Another highlight of the exhibition, and my personal favorite, is this monumental woodcut print, Customs and Fashions of the Turks, by the Netherlandish artist Pieter Koeke van Aalst, published posthumously by his widow Maaike Verhulst in 1553. Consisting of 10 woodcuts that together form 7 scenes separated by male and female decorative caryatids, this frieze is literally the centerpiece of the exhibition. Measuring nearly 5 meters or 16 feet, hence the tiny picture, the frieze constitutes the earliest visual rendering in the Low Countries of a journey to the Ottoman Empire. Through a series of processions, it shows the common route to Istanbul through Eastern Europe taken by 16th century Habsburg imperial diplomats, including Ambassador Cornelis de Schepers, with whom the artist presumably traveled in 1533. In the first scene, Ottoman soldiers are preparing for nightfall in Slavonia, a region in modern-day Croatia. They continue their journey in the second scene. This is always a bit tricky to do. My apologies. Second scene, in which women dressed in traditional Eastern European attire are selling bread and water to the travelers. The third scene shows different Ottoman customs, including greeting, eating, and praying. The following scenes depict Ottoman ceremonies, such as a celebration of a new moon, and you can see the moon all the way to the right. And look at that tiny boy who almost sets flame to his father's kaftan. It's a gorgeous detail. And then after that, we have funerary procession. circumcision feast. So in the circumcision feast, you will see that all of the younger children are wearing hats. That's because these boys haven't been circumcised yet. They will get their turbans afterwards. And then in the final scene, we finally meet. There we go. In the final scene, we finally see Sultan Suleiman on horseback in his weekly procession to the mosque at the Hippodrome in Istanbul. So the overall level of accurate details in both the depicted customs and attire reveal Kuke's intimate knowledge of everyday Ottoman life. And I could easily spend the next 3 hours discussing this monumental woodcut, but because of time constraints, I will only focus on its display. In the 16th century, monumental prints functioned as a wall decoration. They adorned reception rooms, dining rooms, bedrooms, and taverns. Despite the fragility of the medium, and precisely because works on paper were cheaper to produce than tapestries or paintings, monumental woodcuts were more affordable, and as such, available to a wider audience. There were different ways of displaying oversized prints. They could be pasted either directly onto the wall, or they could be mounted on a wooden or textile support. And at the time, domestic interiors consisted largely of wooden panels in the Low Countries, which makes it easier to attach prints. So nowadays, one rarely gets the opportunity to examine this frieze while it is hanging on a wall. So in 2014, I had the pleasure of seeing the frieze installed hanging at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for the exhibition Grand Design, Pieter Kuke van Aalst and Renaissance Tapestry, created by Elizabeth Cleland. And seeing the frieze displayed on a wall instead of lying flat on a study room table completely changes your viewing experience. And this is our study room, just as an example. Kuke forces the viewer to take a step back in order to observe the whole composition and then to step forward in order to examine individual details. And due to the print's length, you have to physically move alongside the frieze for the journey to unfold. As such, Kuke turns us into active participants of the depicted processions. So in order to recreate this unique viewing experience, I collaborated with numerous colleagues in the museum to display the frieze as if it is seemingly pinned to the wall, and I'm extremely happy with the result. And please also, when you go upstairs and you look at it, notice how brilliantly they matched the magnets, the color of the magnets with the paper. I'm still like dazzled with how great a job they did. And so let's now travel to the third gallery of the exhibition. Here I would like to focus your attention on the to be continued section. So from the start, I envisioned that the exhibition could be a moment of encounter for students, local communities, and their summer audiences, as well as a platform from which to share ideas and research. In particular, I wanted to present a multitude of voices offering different perspectives that enrich our understanding of the artworks on display in unique ways. And to this extent, the to be continued section highlights ongoing research at the Harvard Art Museums and University. And it includes labels written by graduate students, museum conservation fellows, and other museum staff members. Now, some of these findings have been further explored in essay-long contributions on a digital resource that you can access either via the exhibition's webpage or via QR codes in the galleries. And one example of still ongoing museum research is the display case in the third gallery, containing a selection of pigments and artist materials. Celia Chari, Beale Family Postgraduate Fellow in Conservation Science, has carried out scientific research on the color palette of Haida Reis's portrait of Francis I that you see at top. And she focuses specifically on the use of yellow para-realgar. This is a rare pigment typically associated with the light-induced color fading of the more prevalent red pigment, realgar. Now, Celia prepared a set of paint-outs that are part of an in situ experiment to monitor color changes of realgar-type arsenic sulfides exposed to gallery lights. The green round box that you see is a data logger that will continuously track the light intensity in the display case throughout the length of the exhibition. And the final results of her experiment will be shared on the digital resource after the exhibition closes. To the best of our knowledge, this is the first time that such an experiment is actually taking place within a gallery setting. So that's quite exciting. On the exhibition's digital resource, you can also read about the diverse student engagement initiatives that happened in the lead up to the exhibition opening. And I do want to mention one specific project because you will be able to see the results tonight. In spring 2024, the Materials Lab and I partnered with the Cambridge-based Community Arts Centre to create a mural-sized collage titled Reimagined Journey, inspired by Koekes Fries. About 35 children, ages 5 to 12, made paper using cookie cutter shaped like tulips, camels, and donkeys, forms related to the exhibition themes of travel and exchange. And then in a second workshop, they drew, colored, cut, and collaged a section of the mural inspired by their own concepts of travel and journey. And so the children's reimagined journey is currently on view in the Materials Lab through May 30th, so it's only here for 2 weeks, and it will be available for viewing tonight until 6 p.m. So that was my part of the lecture. Thank you. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker. There we go. So, Dr. Ayşen Yoltar Yildirim is the Norma Jean Calderwood Curator of Islamic and later Indian art here at the Harvard Art Museums. Her research focuses on Ottoman and Persian manuscript paintings as well as the history of museum collections. Before joining the museums in 2022, and I was really lucky she joined a month after I arrived, so hooray. She held curatorial and teaching positions at several institutions in the United States and her native country, Turkey. Today, she will talk about Haydar Reis and the Ottoman portrait tradition.
Thank you, Talitha. I take the tulip from you for a moment. Okay. Today, I would like to present 2 Ottoman paintings displayed separately in the exhibition, but which came from the same Ottoman album, originally facing each other. The 2 portraits, painted by the Ottoman artist Haydar Reis, represented the French king Francis I and the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. As I will try to explain, these Ottoman paintings differ in technique, size, and style from their European counterparts. However, Haydar Reis was an important artist who incorporated the European portrait tradition into Ottoman art. The 2 portraits are painted in a small scale on paper and meant to be seen in an album. Such albums were assembled from separate paintings and calligraphies in an aesthetic way, and they were viewed by the Ottoman Sultan and his close entourage during court gatherings accompanied by poetry and music. We know that, up until the early 20th century, these 2 paintings were kept in an album in the Ottoman Palace in Istanbul. The album, which has survived partially from its original, is now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and known as the Bellini album. It is thought to have once contained a portrait of an Ottoman prince by the Italian painter Gentile Bellini. The album includes assemblages of not only Ottoman works on paper, such as these 2 portraits, but also Persian and European works. Here you see a Persian miniature painting and an Ottoman calligraphic composition in the shape of a bird within beautiful framing bands and marginal decoration of this album. Also from the same album, you can see here Italian and Netherlandish prints of mostly religious content assembled within similar decorative bands and margins. As is, the album provides a snapshot of the cultural ties of the Ottomans with their immediate Eastern and Western counterparts. Most likely, the album was assembled in the early 17th century with works that had already accumulated at the Ottoman court since the times of Mehmed II, who conquered the city in 1453 and soon moved his court there. After the conquest of Constantinople, while the European powers worried that Rome would be the next target of the Sultan, Mehmed II became increasingly aware of his prestige in Europe and focused on disseminating his image as a new powerful ruler in Europe and invited several Italian artists to his court. The Italian artist Costanzo de Ferrera, who was sent by the King of Naples, arrived in Istanbul in the 1470s and executed a medal of Mehmed, which he later revised. Here on the left, Mehmed is shown in profile view, somewhat overweight, as he was suffering from gout in those days. In 1479, the Venetian Republic sent Gentile Bellini, who stayed in Istanbul for nearly 2 years. Like Constanzo, Bellini executed a medal of Mehmet, also in profile view, but showing him with a slimmer face, reflecting his older age. These medals circulated in Europe as many other copies were made. Bellini's real artistry was in oil painting. Here is his famous portrait of Mehmet II, shown in three-quarter view, sitting under an arch with 3 crowns on each side. During his stay in Istanbul, Bellini made numerous drawings and sketches that provided ample knowledge of the Sultan and his court to Europeans. Although they did not survive, Bellini is also said to have decorated some apartments of Mehmet's newly built palace in Istanbul, the present-day Topkapı Palace. It is thought that Mehmet's son, Sultan Bayezid II, who did not share his father's European taste, removed them. In Europe, Mehmet's portraits appear to have instigated a portrait tradition for Ottoman rulers. Here you see Mehmet and possibly his son Cem, attributed to a painter in the circle of Bellini. In the Ottoman world, the effects of Mehmet's portraits were not as visible. Initially, only a few Ottoman artists followed this tradition and did not execute oil paintings. Instead, they painted small portraits on paper meant for manuscripts or albums, as was the custom in Islamic courts. These paintings are attributed to the Ottoman artists Sinan Bey and Şiblizade Ahmet Bey, who are known from written records, but we don't have their signed works, so that's why they're attributions. We don't know if and how these portraits were circulated, but they have been incorporated into albums still present at the Topkapı Palace Library. One can easily see their relationship to European medals and paintings. After Mehmet II, the Ottoman rule expanded and reached its highest geographical reach during the reign of Sultan Süleyman in the 16th century. These maps show the territories of the Ottoman Empire and their main adversary in Europe, the Habsburgs, under Charles V. The French king, Francis, was also a rival of the Habsburg Empire and sought a political alliance with the Ottomans. Here you see a result of this alliance. In 1543, the Ottoman navy, headed by the famous Admiral Barbaros Hayreddin, joined the French forces to attack Nice, which was under the control of the Savoys, an ally of the Habsburgs. The painting comes from an Ottoman manuscript where similar military campaigns and victories were depicted by the Ottoman artist Matrakçı Nasuh, who joined the military campaigns. Beginning with Süleyman, Ottoman sultans sponsored several illustrated manuscripts that depicted their victories on land and sea, such as this one. In general, these manuscripts were prepared in court workshops by a group of artists who excelled in writing the text in a calligraphic hand, painting the decorations, and illustrating the text. These court artists were salaried, and we can find their names in Ottoman court registers. The artist of our two paintings, Haydar, was not among them. His two epithets are helpful. One is Nigari, which means figure painter, and the other is Reis, a sea captain. Haydar is also known to have composed poetry and written a rhyme book called The Pearls of the Sea, to be presented to Sultan Süleyman. According to his own words and other contemporary records, Haydar Reis initially lived in the Galata district in Istanbul. His family hailed from Egypt, and his grandfather was a knowledgeable scholar on chess. Since the 1520s, coinciding with Süleyman's reign, Haydar worked in the Ottoman navy and traversed the eastern and western parts of the Mediterranean. He joined naval campaigns under the famous Admiral Barbaros Hayreddin, and he painted a portrait of the admiral around 1540s. Here you see the famous admiral on the left, depicted in old age, smelling a carnation, not too different from the portrait of Mehmet II executed about 60 years earlier. Haydar's hand shows more strokes, perhaps an indication of his familiarity with European prints, which he may have often encountered. His dark monochrome background is also quite different from earlier Ottoman portraits. It too can be seen as a direct influence of the European oil paintings. Here we can compare Haydar's portrait of Francis on paper, practically a hand-sized painting, with the larger oil paintings made in Europe. I don't mean to say that these were the actual works Haydar saw and copied, but it gives a good idea of what was circulating and what Haydar may have seen. Here, Haydar Reis painted Francis's headgear with the white fur, a bit awkward, perhaps not knowing how it was exactly. He included the fleur-de-lis design, the symbol of the French kingdom, on Francis's hat. His beard and mustache are very close, although Haydar lacked the knowledge of foreshortening. Francis's hand is depicted in a similar pose, resting on a table, but the details of his dress are perhaps not well understood. The white cloth, literally pulled out from the slits of the fabric garment on the right, has turned into almost decorative white units in Haydar's painting on the left. Also, instead of the white pleated collar area, Haydar employed designs he knew well from Ottoman textiles. Here at the bottom is a detail from another painting by Haydar, where we see the textile design with the two wavy lines. In Charles V's portrait, Haydar used a profile view, like the Spanish artist in the middle, but the golden dress and the fur coat are closer to the painting by the Austrian artist, the court painter of Charles V, on the right. You can see Haydar's strokes on the fur coat and the cross-hatching on the face, which he may have copied from European prints. Haydar's coloring may have also been a direct influence of European paintings, as no other Ottoman painter used such dark backgrounds. Here you see Haydar's other works with a similar dark background. On the left, Haydar depicted Sultan Süleyman in his old age, wearing a simple kaftan. On the right, you can see a hunting scene painted by Haydar, more in line with the traditional Ottoman manuscript painting, but the background is unusual. During the last years of Süleyman's reign, his son Selim was left as the only heir to the throne, since all of his brothers were eliminated on their path to the Ottoman throne. Haydar Reis was a boon companion to the prince during this time. From written records, we know that Haydar composed poetry and joined Selim's courtly entertainments. There are two paintings of Selim by Haydar Reis. In this first one, he is shown shooting an arrow towards a target held by a figure wearing an animal skin hat and a shawl. And from the inscription, one could interpret that it was Haydar who was holding the target. In the other double-page composition, Selim is shown drinking wine, while courtly figures inscribed by their names are shown across from him, rendered in small scale. In the oval medallion, Nigari, Haydar's other epitaph, is written as the servant of Sultan Selim Han. Thus, some suggested that the figure interrupting the musicians, on the very right up, would be, again, Haydar Reis himself. If we go back to our paintings, we see that Haydar also wrote inscriptions below the paintings. In the direction of the Ottoman book, one would read from right to left. The inscription says, "One is Spain, one is France, came to Sultan Selim to petition for an imperial letter, your loyal servant Haydar." Since the two European rulers never came to Istanbul and weren't even alive when Selim came to power in 1566, it's not clear how we're supposed to interpret Haydar's words. Did he mean the ambassadors of these two countries who came to Selim II? In fact, there were possible occasions. In 1568, 2 years after Selim acceded to the Ottoman throne, a treaty was signed with the Habsburg King Maximilian II, who recognized recent Ottoman conquests in Hungary and continued paying an annual tribute to the Sultan. The French ambassadors had already established permanent residency in Istanbul since 1536. So it is possible that Haydar Reis wanted to document such an occasion, giving Selim an elevated diplomatic success on par with his father Süleyman, who succeeded in creating the powerful empire Selim inherited. Since Haydar knew well the two previous Habsburg and French kings, through his position in the Ottoman navy, it was perhaps natural for Haydar to choose their portraits. After all, Haydar was a close companion of Selim, and it was his job to elevate the prestige of the new Ottoman Sultan. Haydar's portraits did not necessarily establish a new painterly style for the Ottomans, but the idea of portraying Ottoman rulers and incorporating them into manuscripts and albums took a hold and continued for several centuries in Ottoman art. Here you see on the right Selim II depicted in this more traditional style, most likely incorporated in the same Ottoman album as Haydar's portraits. Thank you.
So it is now my absolute pleasure to welcome our second guest speaker of tonight, Stephanie Schrader. Stephanie is curator in the Department of Drawings at the J. Paul Getty Museum, specializing in Dutch and Flemish art. Her interests in cross-cultural exchanges include exhibitions, publications, lectures, and classes on artists such as Jan Gossard, Maria Sibylla Merian, Peter Paul Rubens, and Rembrandt van Rijn. Dedicated to bringing diverse audiences to the J. Paul Getty Museum, her innovative exhibitions engage the public in new and unexpected ways. Recently, she broadened her interests and curated exhibitions about early 20th century American printmaking and 19th century Danish art. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie.
Thank you for that introduction and for inviting me to speak to you today about Rembrandt van Rijn and a series of drawings he made after Mughal paintings. These 23 drawings were the focus of an exhibition that I curated at the Getty in 2018. Rembrandt and the Inspiration of India, whose book cover you can see on the screen, was a tremendous undertaking, and I greatly benefited from the generosity and expertise of many colleagues here at Harvard, most notably Bill Robinson and Penley Knipe. As I learned from the many tours I gave, visitors came to the exhibition because of the name recognition of Rembrandt, but they stayed for the Islamic art of Mughal India. I'm proud that an exhibition made lovers of Rembrandt consider the artist in a new light. As a curator of Dutch and Flemish drawings, I've thought a lot about Rembrandt as a teacher. Today, I will introduce you to a time when the wondrous art of the Mughal Empire inspired Rembrandt to become a pupil. Late in his career, when he was in his 50s, the celebrated 17th century Dutch artist Rembrandt made paintings and drawings that are very loose and gestural in their handling. You see quintessential examples of this type of work on the screen. I'd like you to focus your attention to the drawing depicted on your right. Executed with a broad brush in dark brown ink, Rembrandt's portrayal of the seated woman is highly evocative. In contrast to these well-known artworks, there is a series of drawings notable for their meticulous and careful rendering in pen and ink with touches of wash. On the screen, you see such an example in the Getty's collection. Extremely refined lines convey two standing male figures facing each other. Their tight-sleeved coats, long skirts, fringed waistbands, ruched pants, together with elaborate jewelry adorning their necks, arms, ears, and their feathered turbans, distinguish these men as Mughal rulers. Based on Indian compositions brought to Amsterdam from the Dutch East India trading post in Surat, the Getty drawing bears witness to Rembrandt's artistic curiosity. One ponders what the Dutch artist knew about these protagonists, Shah Jahan and Dara Shikoh, and the vast empire these men lived, ruled, and commissioned artists to make their identities known around the globe. This depiction of Shah Jahan and Dara Shikoh is just one of Rembrandt's 23 surviving drawings closely based on paintings from Mughal India. Drawn on expensive Asian paper and notable for their nuanced response to Indian compositions, these sheets mark a watershed moment when the Dutch master responded to the art of a dramatically different culture. Rembrandt's refined portraits of Mughal emperors and courtiers convey the Dutch master's intimate study not only of Indian rulers' physiognomy, clothing, jewelry, and weapons, but also of the meticulous art that they championed. In my brief talk today, I will touch upon how Rembrandt encountered art of Mughal India, how he responded to what he saw, and how his drawings present him as a player on Amsterdam's international stage. I will begin with a bit of historical background. Rembrandt greatly benefited from Amsterdam's international market. On the screen, I show you the imaginative recreation of his art collection that you can find in the Rembrandt House in Amsterdam. This room of Rembrandt's collection of art and natural specimens was recreated by using the 1656 inventory of his possessions that the artist himself helped draw up to avoid bankruptcy. Rembrandt's extensive compilation of foreign goods allowed him to study art from all around the world within the confines of his Amsterdam home. With a collection on par with those of wealthy Dutch merchants, Rembrandt made known that he did not need to travel to study or train his eye. Instead, the world came to him in Amsterdam. According to the inventory, Rembrandt's foreign possessions included those identified as Chinese, Japanese, and Turkish, as well as many East Indian and Indian objects. These latter terms, Indian and East Indian, could refer to geographical areas from modern-day India to Japan and Indonesia, and they most certainly included goods from Mughal India. The Mughal Indian Empire covered the vast geographic area, including what today is Afghanistan, much of western Pakistan, all of northern and central India, and Bangladesh. Its emperors traced their lineage back to Timur, or Tamerlane, the Turco-Mongol conqueror and founder of the Timurid Empire in Persia. The power and the splendor of the Mughal rulers is reflected in the titles they gave to their court painters, like Wonder of the Age and Rarity of the Realm. Rembrandt's inventory lists East Indian cups, boxes, baskets, and fans, as well as 60 Indian hand weapons, including arrows, shafts, javelins, and bows, and a pair of costumes for an Indian man and woman. Goods such as these were imported in vast numbers into Amsterdam on Dutch East India ships that left the port of Surat, where Dutch merchants had established a foothold in 1616. Surat was the natural crossroads of two overland trade routes to Agra and Delhi, cities favored by Mughal emperors Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb. Rembrandt depicts all three emperors in his drawings, and all three of these rulers were Rembrandt's contemporaries. The Dutch had a near monopoly on the import to Surat of copper and silver from Japan, as well as cloves and nutmeg from Southeast Asia. And the profits made from this trade were used to buy indigo and cotton to export to Europe. For this lucrative trade network to flourish, the all-powerful Mughal emperors, who had authority over all trade in their territorial domains, issued royal edicts to give Dutch protection and privilege. The Dutch East India Company's successful trade negotiations with Mughals gave rise to the importation of Indian goods into Amsterdam, which found their way into Rembrandt's collection and ultimately into his art. The Dutch global economy did more than bring paintings into Rembrandt's world. It also supplied the paper onto which he made his drawings. Although Rembrandt made extensive use of Asian papers in his print production in the 1650s to increase the prices of the impressions, his depictions of Mughal emperors and their courtiers present the only instance when he drew on Asian paper. This paper underscored the exotic character of the drawings and would have enhanced the notion that Rembrandt's copies, like the Mughal originals, were expensive luxury items. It has often been assumed that Rembrandt owned an album of Mughal paintings. I show you other foreign objects that Rembrandt was thought to have owned. Listed in his bankruptcy inventory as item 203 is a book of curious drawings in miniature, as well as woodcuts and engravings on copper of various costumes. Given Rembrandt's sustained study of numerous Mughal compositions, scholars have in the past hypothesized that this album contained the Mughal artwork, the miniatures that inspired him. As there are no specific records of Mughal paintings in Rembrandt's inventory, as there are for shells or other artworks, one must use caution when we're inferring what curious drawings in the inventory means. In other 17th century Dutch inventories, Mughal works on paper were commonly referred to as Mughal or East Indian or Surat drawings. As these identifications do not appear in Rembrandt's inventory, we cannot assume that he actually owned the album. Instead, it seems more likely that he saw a precious album by one of his associates in Amsterdam and made copies to record their splendor. Rembrandt's clientele primarily consisted of Dutch merchants, some of whom I show you on the screen, and these men certainly had the means as well as the connections to acquire Mughal paintings. For example, Rembrandt knew several high officials in the Dutch East India Company. His neighbor was a VOC lawyer. Another acquaintance was a merchant and collector who was a VOC governor. I could say all their Dutch names, but I think it might be faster if I just summarize for you. He also, one of his patrons owned several portraits of VOC officials, and he was had an important role in the Dutch East India Company as he served as Consul of India, commander of the company's naval forces in the kingdoms of Gujarat and Persia. And when Rembrandt needed money to buy his expensive house, where they've recreated this art collection, he borrowed a large sum of 4,180 guilders from the mayor of Amsterdam, Cornelius Witsen, who himself had an impressive collection of paintings, books, antiquities, and all kinds of rare objects. And Witsen's son, Nicholas, had one of the most important collections of Indian paintings in Amsterdam in the second half of the 17th century. And it is entirely possible that Rembrandt knew some of them, these collections. But what recently has been suggested is that Rembrandt might have based his drawings on a now lost album of Mughal paintings owned by Jan Uyttenbogaert, the tax collector general of the Netherlands. On the screen you see Uyttenbogaert's portrait etched by Rembrandt in Harvard's collection. And according to a Dutch historical account, Cosimo III de' Medici visited the Netherlands in 1668, and Uyttenbogaert presented him with, and I quote, "a quite valuable book of Mughal portraits." Rembrandt's careful study and close imitation of Mughal composition visually proves that he had access to imperial paintings made between 1610 and 1655, mostly around the 1620s. And I show you an example of this type of painting on the screen. This depiction of Shah Jahan was one of 100 or more that would appear in an imperial album. Dated around 1630 to 1640, this masterpiece by Biktar, a Hindu artist who worked from 1615 to 1650 for Muslim emperors Jahangir and Shah Jahan, is notable as an expressive depiction of individual sovereignty, painted with concise lines, a bright palette, and numerous allusions to Western pictorial conceits, including angels holding a European crown. The keen interest in the art of Mughal India was not exclusive to Rembrandt, but extended to his fellow artists who worked for or had a close association with the Dutch East India Company. The Amsterdam artist Willem Sellings, who was acquainted with Rembrandt from a mutual colleague, did not travel to India, but inherited an envelope of East Indian drawings from his brother, who was employed by the VOC. Schelling's firsthand study of East Indian art may have furnished the inspiration for his art, as well as a poem that he published in 1657 that praised Indian paintings above European art. According to Sellings, now ingenious Gurati shows, so beauteously on the page, his painting more wondrously noble than an artist's brush ever made. And with this, he mocks Europe, knocking from its head art's crown. Thus was art despoiled by art. Which artist ever thought that artistry would climb to the peak, to the stars? All Christendom rightly agaps, astonished, and struck dumb. This poem implies Mughal paintings were not only commonplace in global Amsterdam, that the meticulous, detailed portraits of Indian rulers inspired Dutch artists with awe. Rembrandt made artistic choices when he portrayed Mughal rulers. He decided to carefully imitate the scale of the figures and always showed them in strict profile or three-quarter view. Rembrandt did not go out of his way to imitate the color of Mughal paintings. This is not surprising, as Rembrandt was an artist who rarely used color in his drawings. Typically, he preferred brown ink and wash, and he occasionally drew with red and black chalk. Of the now 750 accepted drawings by Rembrandt, only 9 of them evidence a use of color, and of these 9, 5 of them are after Mughal compositions. I show you details from some of these colorful sheets on the screen. In the first instance, we see Rembrandt's use of red chalk wash in the face of Kani Kanan to suggest skin tone. This is contrasted with the gentle blotting or scraping, so the elderly man's beard, hair, mustache, and turban, and even the white of the eye appear white, in contrast to the reddish flesh tones. In another example, we see how he applied red chalk wash to decorate the staff, the sash, the leggings, and the shoes. Rembrandt's copies reveal his fascination with the Mughal style, as well as his keen interest in the emperor's clothing, weapons, and jewelry. The drawing of Prince Aurangzeb in Harvard's collection, the one that you'll see upstairs in the exhibition, is the most detailed and careful depictions by the Dutch artist. Aurangzeb, who was the third son of Shah Jahan, ruled from 1658 to 1707. Known as the world's Caesar, Aurangzeb is mostly remembered for deposing his father and executing his older brother, Dara Shikoh. Here Rembrandt portrays him equipped with a long sword, shield, and a dagger. Aurangzeb's earlier career as viceroy and governor of the Deccan is evidenced by the floral pattern in the jama and the waistband, as well as the striped fabric of the oblong turban. Rembrandt went to great trouble to depict the smallest of sartorial details, such as the egret feathers hanging from the turban ornament worn as an emblem of royalty, a jeweled pendant hanging from a chain, and an arm ornament. He also indicated the longer beard of Aurangzeb with short staccato strokes of the pen. Rembrandt focused his attention upon artistically evoking the majestic style of Mughal portraiture. As an artist who spent most of his career painting portraits of himself and wealthy Dutch citizens, he was well trained in decoding portrayals of power, divine right, majesty, and wealth. In his depictions of Mughal rulers, he punctiliously recorded teeny details of facial features. For example, a detail of Shah Jahan and Dara Shikoh reveals that Rembrandt scratched out his first attempt to portray the Shah's nose and redrew the nose bridge. He also took note of the six-pointed crossover tunic with slits at the skirt and asymmetrical hemline of Jahangir's brother, Prince Danyal, that went out of fashion after the death of their father, Akbar, in 1605. And in Harvard's drawing, Rembrandt carefully considered the position of the sword behind Aurangzeb, scratching away his first attempt and redrawing it so it better aligned with the sword hilt. Rembrandt's intimate understanding of the faces, clothing, and jewelry of the Mughals and their wondrous art must have positioned him well with the international-minded collectors of Amsterdam. When he made his Indian portrait drawings around 1660, he needed the patronage of wealthy and curious-minded connoisseurs. His financial mismanagement had lost him his expensive house and his art collection. He also claimed that he suffered damages and losses at sea. In his final phase of his artistic production, before he died in 1669, Rembrandt turned his hand to almost every category of portraiture, engaging with traditions and conventions that were wide-ranging. I show you a self-portrait from this period that imparts his noble presence. Perhaps Rembrandt's refined portraits of Mughal rulers drawn on expensive Asian paper were one of the ways he hoped to demonstrate his sophisticated knowledge of the world and regain his wealth and status. 18th century provenance suggests that Rembrandt conceived of the Mughals' copies as a series. Perhaps he originally made them with one of his patrons employed by the Dutch East India Company in mind. After all, the successful trade networks created by the officers of the VOC brought Saratsa ticketing to Amsterdam, which in turn created a high regard for the wondrous nature of Indian painting and inspired Rembrandt to alter his drawing style. Rembrandt's Mughal copies demonstrate his global connections, his sophisticated taste as a connoisseur, his curiosity as a student of foreign art. His careful consideration of Mughal compositions pushed his own drawing style in new directions, making it more curious, more Mughal. Drawn on Asian paper and quoting the carefully crafted art from the wealthiest and most splendid Asian empire, Rembrandt's drawings would have appealed to Dutch merchants, connoisseurs, and other artists who saw the potential of the Mughal style to inspire their global success. Today I've shown you a different side of Rembrandt. Not the Rembrandt who is celebrated for his atmospheric drawings of the Dutch countryside, biblical scenes infused with poignant psychological drama, expressive head and figure studies, and depictions of artists at work, like the ones you see illustrated here on the screen. Instead, you've seen Rembrandt embedded in the cosmopolitan city of Amsterdam and global trade networks. Today, Rembrandt is an artist that took inspiration from exquisite paintings from Mughal India and learned to draw in a new way. Thank you and happy graduation.
Okay, and then last but not least, I'm delighted to introduce our final guest speaker. Yael Rice is Associate Professor of Art History and of Asian Languages and Civilizations at Amherst College. She specializes in the art and architecture of South Asia, Central Asia, and Iran, with a particular focus on manuscripts and other portable arts of the 15th through 18th centuries. She is the author of the recently published The Brush of Insight, Artist and Agency at the Mughal Court, University of Washington Press, 2023. Congratulations. And she was a contributor to the 2018 Rembrandt and Inspiration of India exhibition catalog edited by Stephanie Schrader. So let's welcome Yael.
Thank you, Talitha. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it. Okay. Imagine Me and You offers a captivating window onto the diverse ways that Netherlandish artists experienced and perceived the Islamic world, often from a distance. An analogous phenomenon could be observed on the other side. In the case of 16th and 17th century Mughal South Asia, European works on paper, and especially prints, offered one of the primary means by which artists and others came to know the West. This depiction of the Virgin and Child from the exhibition provides the traces of one such encounter. In this case, the Indian artist, a certain Jamal Muhammad, to whom a Persian inscription credits the work, probably drew from a Netherlandish print, like this one, depicting the Byzantine icon known as the Salus Populi Romani, which is today held in Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome. The Harvard work represents just one of numerous images of Christian theme that the Mughal emperors and members of their courts patronized and collected. And while it and the other example we see here date from the second quarter of the 17th century, there's reason to believe that European images, and prints especially, had been received at the Mughal court many decades prior. Indeed, a text penned in the late 16th century offers tantalizing evidence that the Mughal Emperor Humayun may have been in possession of European compositions from as early as 1552. The source in question describes these objects as kalami siyahi, which may be interpreted as an allusion to either monochromatic black pen, that's literally what that Persian expression means, or, as I've argued elsewhere, prints. Following the arrival of the first Jesuit mission at the Mughal court in 1580, European prints and illustrated printed books became more abundantly available, a fact that's registered by the numerous extant paintings and drawings that Mughal artists made after them. And you see one of those here on the left, and another one also on the left. Some of the prints themselves were also preserved in Mughal albums, known as murakas. With some exceptions, the European prints that Mughal painters seem to have had access to were of a very specific type: didactic, highly linear, lacking in a significant tonal range, and largely Flemish, Dutch, and German in origin. Many portrayed such scenes as the Virgin and Child, as we've seen, and Jesus' crucifixion and deposition. the kind of stock images that Jesuits employed to advance their activities, missionary activities around the world. Indeed, the Jesuits had hoped to convert the Mughal emperors Akbar and Jahangir to Catholicism, but that aim would come to naught. If neither the emperors nor their sons were fully persuaded by the Jesuits' missionary messages, how can we explain Mughal artists' earnest engagement with European and, in particular, Marian and Christological printed images? Earlier scholarship conceived of Mughal painters largely as the passive recipients of European visual culture. In short, art historians characterize Mughal artistic reception as an act of absorption. Confronted with the startling naturalism of Netherlandish, German, and Italian engravings, Mughal artists were said to have soaked up European techniques of cross-hatching and other approaches to depicting weight-bearing forms. Implicit in these statements was the assumption that Mughal painters ingested European approaches to representation wholesale, and that they did so because they recognized the superiority of the European hand. These interpretations rested on the premise that European naturalism was, or should be, any artist's goal. More recent studies since have painted a different picture, one in which Mughal artists played much more active role in these processes. Note, for example, that the Mughal painting we see here on the left is hardly a rote mechanical copy of the print on the right. Besides the many compositional adjustments that the Mughal painter made to his work, including the introduction of the angels overhead, he also added color, a crucial component that this print lacks. In this work mounted on an album page, the female artist Nini translated Hieronymus Wierix's engraving of the death of Saint Cecilia into a fully colored painting. The title of the composition and the attributions to Wierix found in the original engraving, and I'm talking about that lower register on the right, have here been replaced with a specimen of calligraphy, again, the lower register on the left, by Sultan Ali Mashhadi, who had died in Herat, Afghanistan in 1520. By combining materials from different periods and places, the album page served as a site for the comparative examination of form. The European element here appears easily integrated, an indication of the degree to which it was deemed adaptable and even productive to the Mughal album's particular aesthetics of juxtaposition. The Harvard work is likewise adaptive and selective in its response to the European source materials, which may have included the Wierix print we see here on the right. For one, the artist Jamal Muhammad extended the figure of the Virgin, thereby transforming the Byzantine half-length icon into a full-length image. He has also added the soaring angels and the landscape, which includes a vignette at lower left, showing you a detail, which shows a gathering of devotees of the Hindu god Shiva, and above that, a structure that recalls the architecture of the Adil Shahi rulers of Bijapur in southern central India. Note too the artist's addition of gold and color, especially the red that tints the Virgin's hands and feet, as if they had been dyed with henna. Jamal Muhammad's close engagement with European prints seems to have been motivated, at least in part, by formal concerns. We may observe, for example, how he reproduced the cross-hatching that the makers of European engravings employed to create the subtle effects of modeled voluminous form. In fact, European prints share a relationship with the singly authored drawings, again termed siya kalam, or black pen, that artists in Mughal India created using stippling and a variety of other graphic techniques, including cross-hatching. It's important to note that Mughal Sia Kalam compositions drew upon a much older custom of black pen and lightly tinted drawing that can be traced to early 15th century Iran and Central Asia. In other words, European prints were met in Mughal South Asia by a cadre of artists and patrons who were already familiar with and appreciative of tonal pictorial practices. Oops. Jamal Muhammad's act of emulating the European print or prints is resonant with early modern Persian pedagogic practices, wherein painters mastered or expected to master and demonstrate thereby their mastery of their craft by copying, but also diverging from exemplars. Emperor Jahangir's royal album, or Muraka, which combined paintings, engravings, and calligraphies in pairs and larger groupings, operated on this principle by inviting its users to analyze form against form and model against copy. A comparative pairing of this type is found on two facing folios from this album. On the right-hand side, and thus in the context of an Islamic codex, the first page of the pair, a painting of two fighting camels bearing an inscription to the artist Behzad, who was active in Timurid Herat and later in Safavid Tabriz from the late 15th into the early 16th centuries. So we see that image again on the right. And on the left-hand side, a very similar composition, right? A copy. This one bearing an inscription to the Mughal artist Nanha and a date of 1608-09 or 1017 Hijri. Here, the Mughal artist, again, the work on the left, proves his merit by emulating the contours of the deceased master's composition. This simulative act is also pedagogical in function, for by tracing the outlines of Behzad's work, Nanha attempts to commit the composition to memory. Though the chronological arrangement is temporally sequenced, so the earlier work, again on the right, precedes the later one on the left. It presents the paintings as two performances on a single theme, and so disrupts any reading of the pair's relationship as being strictly hierarchical in nature. By copying as well as recasting a composition that had been attributed to the master Behzad, the Mughal artist Nanha sought to insert himself into a longer chain of artistic tradition. Might we see in Jamal Muhammad's composition a similar attempt to both copy and perhaps improve upon an earlier work? But images of Mary and Jesus also carried a very specific resonance at the Mughal court. It's important to understand, firstly, that Mary and Jesus, or Maryam and Isa in Arabic, are highly revered figures in Islam. Indeed, one of the chapters of the Quran is named for Mary, and Jesus is mentioned numerous times, and is there identified as al-Masih, or the Messiah, again in the text of the Quran. During Akbar's reign, that is the Mughal Emperor Akbar's reign, the emperor and his ideologues promoted the idea that the Mughal sovereign was himself a messianic figure, and therefore Jesus-like. The context for this claim was the approaching close of the first Islamic millennium in 1591 AD, that's 1000 Hijri. Akbar was in turn declared to be the renewer of the second millennium, a savior king who would revive Islam for a new age. His familial connection to the celebrated cosmic ruler, Timur, helped to legitimize these assertions. But the Mughals also capitalized on their matrilineal descent from Alan Gowa, the mythical Mongol progenitor of the lineage of Genghis Khan, who is said to have been impregnated by a shaft of light. Sound a little familiar? Thus, similar to Jesus, the Mughal emperors alleged to possess miraculous origins. Their chief chroniclers advanced these claims to sacred kingship in dynastic histories, where they described important Mughal women of the court as Mary-like as well. Royal painters, for their part, articulated. Sorry, I'm having trouble advancing the slides. Okay, that worked. Royal painters, for their part, articulated their patrons' messianic assertions by depicting them alongside paintings of Jesus and Mary, a not-so-subtle invitation to perceive all the Mughal emperors as kin to the Christian Messiah and his immaculately conceived mother. They also illustrated multiple copies. Before I get to that, here's just another example, a really fantastic painting down the road at the MFA Boston. And I'll draw your attention to this detail at the top, and I've circled it, where we see the Mughal Emperor Jahangir, and overhead is an image of the Virgin Mary. So the Mughal artist also illustrated multiple copies of the Myriad al-Quds, or Mirror of Holiness, a Persian language history of the life of Jesus, completed in Agra in 1602. Commissioned by Akbar, this text was composed by the Jesuit priest Jerome Xavier in collaboration with Abdus-Sattar ibn Qasim Lahori, an author and translator active at the Mughal court. The multiple manuscript copies of the Myriad al-Quds bear numerous novel representations, that is, they're unique to the European visual record, of the Holy Family, including a scene of the Annunciation in which Mary is shown being represented with a crown, and that's on the right, so not unlike the image that appears in the exhibition. Within the Mughal imaginary, Jesus, Mary, and the emperors were considered to be of the same nature. In sum, Jamal Muhammad's production of this work could have been motivated by any number of factors, from the formal and the pedagogical to the more decidedly political. The value of studying these phenomena lies in what they can tell us about the shifting status and function of objects abroad. In this case, the potentiality for European prints to become radically transformed in their new contexts. The graphic linearity of the European prints that traveled to India enabled them to be easily fitted into the Mughal visual regime, and yet only, and perhaps ironically, as an analog to the singular indexical marks of imperial court painters and calligraphers' hands. The assimilation of European prints at the Mughal court thus transformed this reproducible medium into a highly valuated, unique work of art, mediated by neither plate nor press. Thank you.
As we only have about 10 minutes left, we will immediately open up questions to the audience, which is always more fun. And we have Marina and Peter, I think. Yes, Peter is at the top, Marina's here. So raise your hand and they will run towards you.
Is there evidence of knowledge of pigments and like how to make different like interesting pigments moving back and forth at this time? And like what does that evidence look like?
Yes, there is. But I'm not very familiar with pigment recipes per se. Any of you?
I'll just, for example, say in the Ottoman context, the ones that I specifically talked about, Haydar Reis, and our conservators are also executing some tests on them. For example, he has this dark background that is not something usual in the Ottoman context. And we do have some this material called para-realgar, that is used to, that could give a kind of sparkling golden look to yellow. Perhaps, for example, Haydar Reis could not access gold as much as a regular court artist. So he may have tried to use para-realgar because of that. He may have been exposed to it from other contexts as well. So our knowledge of the traditional materials are a little bit more secure. But when we have these kind of objects that are being influenced from a variety of sources, then we have to do more tests and research to kind of understand how they differ. So the scholarship on this is kind of moving slowly, but it has begun. And I don't know if Yael wants to say more on the Mughal side of things.
Briefly, because of time, but when we say back and forth, and artists from Mughal South Asia and their texts and their paintings are, of course, traveling as far as the Ottoman Empire and reverse. So certainly, yes, recipes, ways of making paints are circulating. They're moving. I'm not sure, though, about between necessarily Western Europe and, say, Mughal South Asia. We do have Mughal album pages, though, that bear paintings made with oil paints that some conjecture may have been made actually by European artists. So there is experimentation, for sure.
I have two questions. One for about Rembrandt's drawings. I'm curious to know if Rembrandt, it didn't sound like you were saying he sort of took any lessons from what he learned as a pupil of Mughal art and applied them in other works of art. So I was curious about that. And for Aishin, I just wondered, is there any chance that Haidar Reis's paintings were a request for a letter for himself? Like, here are 2 paintings that I'm offering up. Can I have an imperial letter of credit that I can go buy a fancy estate with, or did it necessarily have to be a reference to those 2 rulers coming to the court?
So in the terms of Rembrandt, I mean, that's been, a lot of people see it as evidence in certain paintings. I personally don't. I see those drawings really as him sort of making his own album that would have been sold. I mean, they were kept together in the 18th century. They were all owned by one patron. So I think they were, kept together as a series. And he really was trying to imitate the album style, not per se to train him for his paintings later.
For Haidar Reis, yes, he's not a salaried court artist because we kind of know the others, so he's not mentioned in the list. But that just gives him kind of his strangeness. He's a sea captain, and he has been in all of those naval campaigns. So he has an added value, almost, I would say. So he could be doing things more directly with the sultans or the prince in Selim II, because he was his boon companion in Kütahya, not in Istanbul. So there was already an ongoing relationship. So we don't know exactly when Haidar Reis executed these paintings. He may have executed them earlier and then incorporated them with an inscription that could come a little bit later as well. But it looks like he definitely wanted to capitalize on what he knew well. But I think he had a direct relationship with the Sultan, either as a prince or when Selim accessioned the throne, and that relationship allowed him to present these works. And they were up until early 20th century in an album, so that shows that it didn't really leave the court. It was made for the court, for the Sultan, and they were kept in that fashion. So his relationship really is, I think, quite exceptional. And other court artists we don't always know, but the court artists' works were seen in other media. So they just did not work on manuscripts individually. They could have created designs, and that's why they were busy doing other things. Whereas Haidar Reis, I guess, was busy traversing the seas and then painting. And in his own works, he actually says that he did paint some kind of a glass on the ship that he worked. So he's definitely working in kind of unexpected ways. So his paintings kind of are a testament to that wonderful mix of things.
Thank you to all the speakers for the incredible insights. I wonder if we might close with Talitha. This is an exhibition that obviously is deeply about the rich research and the scholarly world. But I wonder, given one of your key aims, which is to share the scholarship of this period and this rich material and the concept of cross-cultural exchange with the broader public, and particularly with pre-college families and students, if you might say a little bit about that project with the 5 to 12-year-old kids, what you observed in terms of how they were perceiving the works that they were looking at and the project that you did with them.
Okay, yes, I'm happy to talk about that. I really love to bring children to museums because I think you need to hook them when they're young. And one way of doing that is just let them experiment with works on paper. So the whole point of having the children work on this frieze was not to explain the whole travel to the Ottoman Empire and the diplomatic context, but just to have fun. And we made it more accessible for them. So we gave them examples like, can you imagine traveling for 3 months on foot with no cars, no trains, no airplanes? If you don't have your phone with you, how would you keep busy? Do you like drawing? Because that's what our artists did. And so they incorporated all of that in their mural. Their mural also has like weird, funky things. They were thinking about traveling to other dimensions. So there's a Pokemon portal in there. And one of them added a Wi-Fi tower on the obelisk in Istanbul because you need Wi-Fi. But it's lovely. You should go and find those details. But the main aim was just to get them hooked. And so in 2 weeks, well, actually next week already, gosh, Thursday night is a late night. And right before that, we will welcome the children so they can see their artwork hanging in the museum. So hopefully that encourages them at a later age to come and visit us and not feel like they don't belong. And then we also created an activity sheet. Shout out to Sarah Lieberman, the education fellow, that focuses on families with children ages 8+, so that families can discover the exhibition on their own pace with the children. And these are just like tiny instances to get people involved. And then fun fact, the children used Ottoman marbled paper that was created by Harvard University students in a marbling workshop that we organized here. So trying to bridge this gap between preschool and then high school and university, because we're all students in the end. So yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a pleasure.